Welcome to another video from Dr. Lock. Okay, part 2, automatic door closers, installing the door closer. Now, as you saw from the box, there was no instructions there. So I decided to mask everything up, give me a platform to work on, give me a bit of space that I could mark without marking the frame or the door, and be able to work it out from there. First step first was to line up where the hinges was. This is where the edge of the door closer motor is going to be. And then from there, I measured the gap and went up 35 mil. 33 to 35 mil is where I found the sweet spot to be. From there, I mounted the backing plate. I really like the backing plate, how it comes off. You mount the backing plate and then you put the motor straight on top. I didn't mark all the holes because I only wanted to do just a little test patch with a couple of holes to see if I was on the money. So I just basically cut in a couple of holes here and then mount the plate straight on top. Once I was happy where the motor was sitting, making sure that it's clearing everything and nothing's in the way, most importantly is that the actual knuckle where the motor is connected to has to be above the door itself. If not, when the door opens, it's going to hit it. So what I did was I mounted it with a couple of screws, and then I came along and I started to mount the arm. And once I had mounted the arm, I was able to actually open the door, make sure the door's going to clear that knuckle, make sure that it's sliding, make sure the arm inside the slide was sliding perfectly from left to right without binding or being on an angle, because sometimes the door frames are not square and all that. So the actual arm itself comes apart and there's 3 screws underneath, so it was fairly easy to kind of work it out. I just put it together, bolted it together, and then found the position where the arm's going to be sitting and put 3 Tek screws in it from left to right, and we were good. One thing I did do was I gave it about 10 mil of space in its furthest open position and also its closing position. So you can see that black bit of plastic there. When the door's completely at rest, it's not touching the ends of the cap of the rail, if that makes sense. There's a gap there. So sometimes with these type of doors, they like to go that little bit further every now and again. I didn't want it hitting its bump stop inside the rail, so I gave it extra room. So here I'm just going to put a few more Tek screws into it and test it. And as you can see now, that knuckle in the middle that's connected to the motor has enough room to actually jump the door. So from the tip of the door, or the gap in the door, 33 to 35 mil is about where I found it to be best. Alright, so I'm happy with the position of the motor, I'm happy with the position of the rail, so I'm just pulling it apart again one more time, and this time I'm actually going to drill in all of the screws, make sure all the screws are in there, and put in those big strong screws that it comes with. I only put in a couple of self-drilling ones just to basically make sure that I'm on the money and make sure everything's square. And for some reason I had a whole pack of drill bits, little drill bits, the little cheap ones, and they're either blunt or broke on me every single time. Because my top header was made up of this aluminium, it really didn't help, because sometimes I was drilling through the aluminium, sometimes I was drilling on a corner of the aluminium, so it's like an M put together with another piece below it, so it wasn't really a flat surface. If it was a flat piece of aluminium, it'd be a bit nicer, but it wasn't. Now, to get the cables through, they recommend a 20 mil hole at the front and the back, and you can see that right through the actual mounting bracket of the motor, so that was fairly easy to do. I just basically put a drill through it and then enlarged it, and that was plenty to get my cables through. It's good to have it on both sides. One side would probably be power, and then the other side would be for your sensors. It is always good to make sure you got it level. The slightest bit of unlevelness, you'll kind of notice that from a distance. So I put the level on, I readjusted with the little bit of play that I had in the screws before I drilled too many other holes. Made sure I had it exactly square. For some people, they don't notice 1 mil, but I kind of do. So if it was 1 mil off, I'd notice it. And it was it was about 1 mil off. So the level kind of helps just to make sure you're right on the money. Attaching the motor to the backing bracket is fine. I think there's 8 screws, and you've got this long Allen key, so you can quite easily just reach through and put those screws in. And they've got a little bit of Loctite on them so they don't wiggle loose. And after that, you're pretty much good to go. I would advise running the cables first and pulling them through those holes and then doing that. But I've got a little bit of access behind, so I can kind of feed the cables through the hole. Now I'm hooking up the 240 volt there. Once again, the instructions are pretty poor, so I've hooked that up there. It's not plugged in, and then I'm going to put that cable. Actually, I'm going to disconnect it and then feed it through the hole and bring it back and do that. The actual instructions I got were in Chinese. Don't worry, I did get the English ones, and I put them on the link in the description for the first video. I did use Google Translator, which was an absolutely awesome tool. You just put your camera, your phone in front, and it'll actually translate and tell you exactly what you needed to know. That was just awesome to be able to know what the difference, well, which one is which and what goes where, and what each one is labeled really makes a difference. Okay, so I've put in both motors. I didn't show the other motor because it's basically the same process, just repeat. And the only difference is that one's over the other side. Now I've hooked them both up and I've got it working on a push button on the inside and a sensor on the outside. And as you can see, the speed of them opening. Now there's a couple of things with the settings and the wirings. The way I've got it wired at the moment is synchronized. So the left door will open first and it'll close second, if that makes sense. So basically that means that if you've got a rebated door, the door with the rebate will open second and closed first, and then the other door over the top of it, so that way they interlock properly. You can see that slowdown section. That's to do with the synchronization. The speed of it and all that, I've tweaked it since then, and I'm still waiting on my detector for the inside. So I haven't quite got the final product of the final speed and all the rest to show you just yet, but I will have it in the next video. So you can see on the right when the door closes that that green button I've just mounted there on the wall. That's deliberate so that I can use it as a single door configuration when need be, and the rest of the time it can be as a double door configuration. And I'm going to be mounting the sensor on the top there. I've mounted a sensor there. I deliberately got a short distance sensor, but the problem is with that short distance sensor is it actually trips when the door closes, so I'm going to have to change that one out. But in all fairness, they open and they close quite nicely. So this was a bit of an experiment to see what these door closers are like, coming in at $400. A lot of these door closers are generally really expensive. You're talking $1,400, $2,000. So this was more of an experiment to see what they're like, what the adjustments are like, what I can do with it. A lot of the times I get foyer doors that are just absolutely slamming. Everyone's getting annoyed with it, and this might actually be a viable option. Also, if you've got disabled access where you need this type of thing, you know, considering the price on some of the other ones, this might be a bit of a viable option. One of the biggest problems that I see on a lot of my jobs is they don't have a solid header across the door to install such a device, that being the biggest problem. But there's plenty of places that they can install as well. Two doors with the synchronization just makes it more confusing, more troublesome. If you were just doing a single standalone door, then you shouldn't have too many issues, as long as the instructions aren't in Chinese. I mean, I installed these two. It was the first automatic ones I've installed, and to be quite honest, within an hour, both of them were up on the door and swinging and moving the doors like you see quite easily. So reasonably impressed at this stage. The wiring and the way that the wiring works, I was not impressed. That I lost a couple of hours working out what they're actually trying to say, because the instructions might show you this or show you that, but they're not really clearly making a lot of sense as a normal diagram would from any other appliance. Okay, so just a quick note at this stage, it's going to throw a lot of people off. The wiring for the sensor. The sensor came with 4 wires, no black, no red. It was green, yellow, brown, and white. And although the sensor said AC and DC, which means you could have your positive and negative switched around, it'd still work. It didn't want to work that way. Also, the doors didn't want to close properly. They stayed ajar sometimes. That was because the normally open trigger wire for the sensor and the other one going to ground were back to front. So I swapped them around, then the doors were closing properly. But with the actual negative and positive, it does kind of make a difference. So if your sensor's not working properly, make sure your negative and positive's right, and your normally open and your ground wire are in the correct configuration. It also tells you there's a 12-volt output for access control, and you do actually have to put in a jumper wire on on 2 of the terminals there to make all that happen. So really unfriendly instructions. When they say to do something, they should say with an example, but they generally don't. They just give you all these things and then you have to plug it in. You pull out the multimeter and work it out. Anyway, that's it for part 2. I'll be on part 3 shortly. Thanks for watching.